Hello and welcome to Mediumship Matters with me, Hannah McIntyre. And I'm very excited to bring you another special guest today, Thea Strom. Now, Thea is an animal communicator. She's got a book and she is also incredibly patient because she's had to, well, she hasn't had to, I've had to reschedule this interview. She's waited for this a long time. She's got several grey hairs that have come in since she's been waiting for me to be free to talk. But she's done it. She's here. Welcome, Taya. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure, and I'm so glad we could finally make this work. So,
Just been one of those years for me. So
yeah.
start off by introducing yourself to all the listeners. Tell them what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Taya, like you said, and I'm a medium and I'm an animal communicator, and I also teach as well. So I teach others how to connect to animals, whether living or past, and also connect to humans that have passed away as well.
Amazing. I love it. And the first question I always ask every guest is, how did you start? How did you get into this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was always interested in this sort of work. I was always very drawn to psychics, mediums, anything to do with the world of woo when I was growing up. I was also always very free to explore it, as I luckily personally didn't grow up in a religious family at all. So I always had the freedom to explore it, and I wasn't really scared of it either. But even though I was always very interested in this sort of thing, I never had any particular significant experiences of it when I was little. You hear about mediums who see, their dead
Oh,
grandma at the end of their bed. I actually never had those experiences growing up. So as a result, I actually thought I never would be able to do this sort of thing myself, mediumship or animal communication. But I always felt so pulled towards it, and I kept up with my interest in it. So I read books throughout my teens, and I also went to metaphysical fairs every year. And then when I was around 12 years old, I happened to visit a friend of the family who worked as an animal communicator and medium. And she would take people out on boat tours to swim with wild dolphins and whales. And she would use her animal communication abilities to help facilitate encounters, essentially, for the people she brought out with her. And my mind was blown that this was even a thing, that you could
mm.
do this professionally, even. So I think I always felt pulled towards it in some way. And then when I was around 18, I went through mental health crises, essentially. And as a part of the healing journey of that, that's when I started to take meditation much more seriously. And I started to then also have a couple of odd experiences of visits from, I'd say, just like random people that had passed away out of the blue. And these visits very much freaked me out at the time. And so I started to think that it might be a good idea to take some classes in mediumship so that I could learn to at least control it somewhat so that I wouldn't be just um, bombarded by visits from random spirits.
Yeah.
And so I then started to essentially take it more seriously. I started to develop my mediumship abilities and then psychic abilities. And then through that process, I kind of happened upon animal communication. And I've always felt very drawn to animals, always loved them. But again, no big experiences with it until I actually started to develop my mediumship and psychic abilities. And it was in that time period actually that we had just adopted a kitten. And my husband and I had always only had cats who would, graze their food. So they'd eat only when they were hungry. Food was always available, but they wouldn't like finish it.
Yeah.
And so this new cat that we got was a little different. And one day I was out doing errands and I was driving by my home during one of these errands. And while I drove by my home, all of a sudden I heard in my mind the words, "I'm starving." And then I saw in my mind's eye an empty food bowl, essentially. And it kind of came out of the blue. I thought it was very strange because I knew for a fact I had filled up our cat's food bowl before I left. It
Yeah.
could not possibly be empty. But just in case I stopped by our home and I walked in and my cat was sitting there next to a very empty food bowl and very expectantly wanting more food. And so that was my first sort of conscious experience of animal communication. And I just really fell in love with it. And I started to essentially just practice it with other people's animals.
I love it. So, why was your cat so hungry? Did you ever get to
She,
like, did she just have a big appetite? Because that's
she
my kind of cat,
She
you know.
she still is, and she is a very talkative cat in general, both telepathically in a sense as well as vocal, and she still is very very interested in letting me know when she's hungry, and so it's just her personality, I think. So some just are not born with the whatever sensor that we usually have that tells you that you're full and you're supposed to stop.
Yeah, I don't think I was either. So you obviously, when you were telling that story, then she spoke to you in words. Now, obviously, I do a lot of mediumship, and when you get through, I mean, I'm not an animal communicator. It's only happened a couple of times by surprise. It's not my forte. But when you get through babies or small children, they can kind of talk to you, even though they shouldn't be able to, because you're interpreting the energy. So is that the same for you as with animals?
Yes, absolutely. It very much functions the same way. So even if in that moment I heard words from her, most of the time it really is just a mix of impressions coming through. So you're essentially reading the energy that they're giving you, and it's being translated for you through your psychic senses,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly the same. So you started with an alive and physically here in this physical world kitten telling you that she's hungry. That's hilarious. I'm kind of glad that I can't tune into my dogs because I think they would just constantly be going, "Where is me?" Um, when when did you start to communicate with animals who had passed?
It very much was just part of my development of it. So, like I said, I first started off with mediumship, so connecting to humans that have passed away, specifically, and then kind of happened upon animal communication and then started to practice animal communication. And it kind of goes hand in hand with connecting to living animals. I'd say that it's the same thing because it's just connecting soul to soul with an animal. They just, when they're living, they just happen to have a body. And so
Yes.
it's very similar. Even sometimes I'll do a session for someone. The intention is to connect to their living animals, and their past animals just kind of want to jump in on the session too. And so it's always a bit of a free for all.
I love it.
And I think it just very much happened all at the same time. So already was very open to the idea of connecting to the spirit world.
Do they feel different to you? So if you were doing like a remote reading, would you be able to tell if it was a past animal or an animal that's physically here? Or just sometimes that, because if you're connecting just to the soul and the soul is omnipresent, like how do you work through that?
It's a great question, and it can be very tricky. So there are a couple of things and it's actually very reminiscent of kind of this question of how do you tell if you've switched to psychic versus mediumship, and sometimes there is just a feeling to it, feels it feels slightly different. Of course, that's not a great explanation of it, but
Yes.
the other thing about it is that typically when I am intending to connect to a living animal, I am placing my awareness in front of me and almost connecting to them horizontally out from the front of me. Whereas when I am intending to connect to those in the spirit world, I am actually typically placing my awareness above me or even slightly behind me. And so sometimes I can tell just even from sensing which direction am I feeling drawn, actually. But it is a tricky question because sometimes I'll work with animals that are missing. And one of the questions often is the animal living or is it past? But because of the immense pressure of that question in the context of a missing animal, it can make you really overthink it. And so
Yeah.
it's a very just a subtle difference that you kind of have to almost practice sensing a little bit. Um, but the other thing I'd say also is that there does tend to be a little bit of a difference in terms of the topics that come through. With living animals, it's very much focused on sort of practical things in their life. And sometimes that will come through as well from past animals, but from past animals, it's more about the closure, the
Yeah.
healing.
Yeah.
Whereas with living animals, maybe there's behaviors going on that kind of we need to troubleshoot or, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. They hate their new basket. How could
Yes.
you possibly do that? Yeah. Why did you get another cat? You
Yes.
suck. Yeah, all
Yes.
that kind of stuff. Yeah, I love it. I love it. So, can you give us some examples of communications you've had and changes that you've seen in animals as a result of those?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's so many. So, and it's hard because I also struggle with my memory, but um I'd say, well, it can be literally anything, but often, people will schedule a session with me because they're struggling with behaviors, and
Uh-huh.
behaviors can run a whole range of things. And a behavior can be based off of just the animals doing it because they thought they were supposed to, or they thought they were being helpful with the behavior. So one example that comes to mind is, there was a dog a few years ago I was connecting to, and the dog had just had a habit of like loving to announce himself when they went on walks. So he'd bark and bark and bark just very happily on their walks, and it was quite annoying to the owner. And anytime he walked into a new place, he'd do like a barking announcement, and he just thought he was supposed to do it, or that he thought he was being helpful. And so just from our a conversation about it and me, I took some time to explain to him why it wasn't helpful and what other behaviors the human was hoping for. He ended up just changing it just because he was like, "Oh, okay, I can take that on." And however, there are other situations in which behavior is very much based in anxiety or a deep fear. Um, and those are a little bit trickier to work with because
Mm.
it's deeper and it might be wired in a certain way for them that they can't change sort of just by deciding to. And also, they can't change it even if somebody explains to them what other things they could do. And so, in those cases, it's working with both with animal communication as well as training potentially, or, medications sometimes, or other things that could be helpful to support them. But it really, I, I guess with living animals, I just tend to think of all the different behavioral challenges that come up. And sometimes those behavioral challenges are based off of just that they're a different species than us, and we all have different needs and different ways of looking at the world. So a very common one, for example, and maybe you've experienced this yourself with your own animals, is that they view nighttime sleep very different than us. And so, um, many people struggle with their animals waking them up at night or waking them up too early. And so using animal communication can be really useful to explain to them kind of why humans need one long uninterrupted sleep at night and we don't just nap all day, and what things we're hoping for them to do instead of waking us up. And actually, I've used that also with my own cat, the one I mentioned earlier. She is definitely one who's very vocal, very talkative, and very excited about breakfast. And so I've had to do a lot of conversations with her where I have now encouraged her to just lay next to me in the mornings, calmly, quietly, helping me get my full sleep so that when I am ready to get up, I am happy to give her food and we can kind of have a bit more of a harmonious home. And
Yeah,
luckily,
sure.
she's taken it on.
Do you ever get animals? I mean, because like humans, not everybody is a shining example of the wonderment of humanity. People can be dickheads. Do you ever
Yes.
get animals where they are just like, I do it because I want to, and so there's nothing you can do about it, stick it? Or are animals
Oh,
nicer than people?
no, there's a range of personalities in the animal world as well. And definitely there are some that just go, you know what, this behavior I'm doing actually just really benefits me and I see no reason to change it. And so yeah. Um, and we all know, a dog who's more stubborn or whatever, like those things definitely their personality, the way we experience them without animal communication tends to also be the personality in the animal communication. And so definitely some are just like, no, that's not going to work for me. And so in those cases, the human has to do more compromise than the animal.
So you're paid to go and have a session, and then you just have to turn to the owner and go, I'm sorry, they're stubborn, they're not budging.
Yeah, I'll always give it a try. And a lot of the time, my job is to be almost like a bit of a relationship counselor. So I have to acknowledge the animal side and I have to acknowledge the human's perspective and then see, is there a way we can compromise? What things can the animal agree to? What things can the human agree to? And sometimes, obviously, the human is the one who is like the responsible adult, who does have to then adjust certain things for the animal because honestly, animals have to adjust a lot to humans' way of life. And we have to keep that in mind. And sometimes we have to make sure we're making changes in our life that help them be their best selves.
I love it. It's so funny. So do you find, I mean, have you ever, for example, when we got our second dog, our older dog was not impressed. He did not want his retirement ruined by this whippersnapper, and he suffers her now, but he's not, you can tell. If she got run over by a truck, he wouldn't shed a tear,
Yeah.
whatever, he gone. Have you ever had to sort of say to owners, I don't think these two are ever going to gel? Like, because that must be a really tough side to your job where people are hopeful, they're desperate, they love both dogs, they want it to work, and you're like, I just don't know how we can. Or are you always able to talk reason? Or
There are situations in which it just is not a good fit. And we ideally that is last case rehoming one is definitely last ditch effort. I always try my very best first to see if there is a way to make it work. But yeah, unfortunately, there are just some situations. But I think, yeah, with your case, your dog, like you said, suffers your new one.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so,
he's not mean to
so
her. He's just like, seriously, what have you done? And we're like, sorry.
it's
Seemed
like
like a
a new
good idea.
sibling. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like a
exactly,
sibling. Yeah.
exactly. And then every
Yeah.
now and again they'll cuddle up, and I'm like, I can see you, Monty. All right, you've succumbed. You need some warmth. So it's all fine. But I can imagine there was a period of time where we did think, what have we done? He's never going to get over this. What are we going to do? So it's so fascinating. What about, do you pick up like health complaints? Are they able to tell you if they're eating a food that doesn't agree with them, if their paw hurts or things like that, that can obviously change their behavior?
Oh, absolutely. So that is something that comes up a lot because animals, in general, can't just use words to talk to their humans and let them know about things going on. And also, animals have a tendency to just naturally hide certain things going on in their body as well. So sometimes I'll even sense that an animal does not want to talk about their health in a session or they'll be very hesitant, and then others are happy to tell me literally every single little thing that has happened to them since they were born. So it will range, but yes, they can share essentially symptoms if they are aware of a diagnosis, then they'll share that as well sometimes. I can't ever diagnose, but I usually tell people that I'll acknowledge what the animal's giving me in terms of symptoms and all of that, and I'll leave it with the human, and ultimately then it's up to the human if they want to talk to a vet and explore things a little bit more. But often behaviors can be connected to pain in their body, that kind of thing. And so animal communication can be really helpful for picking up on those things. Because sometimes it's not always obvious, a dog that's aggressive, um, but they're also not showing obvious signs of pain in their body. We can easily miss that.
Mhm. And I know this is probably, there's part of me that's like fighting this question, but also I'm kind of interested to see how you're going to answer it. Because this is the equivalent of people saying to me, "Are you aware of spirits all the time?" And I say, "No, I'm not." Like, they're always there if I look for them, but they're not waking me up. I'm not walking around the supermarket going, "Please don't talk to me." It's not like it is on the TV. Do you pick up, if there's an animal, if you walk past a dog on the street and it's suffering, do you ever get vibes? Are you like, "Oh, can you go to the zoo?" Like
Oh.
those kind of things. What's it like for you in that space?
In the zoo, it's more like me desperately seeing if I can get a connection with like the lion or they're not interested. I
They've
just
had
want
enough
to
from
talk to
people.
a polar bear.
Yeah.
But no, most of the time I'm just, I have my own life to live and I'm not focusing on other people's animals, and I find that it can be a little bit rude even to actively seek out connections with other people's animals who haven't asked for it and the animal isn't asking for it.
Yeah.
So most of it's for me, it's definitely not like I'm walking down the street and I'm hearing, animals reach out to me. Obviously, just doing this work in general, as I'm sure you know too, there is an empathic side to you as well, that if you were to tune into that, you might pick up on those things. For example, if someone is suffering around you, you can sense it, it's just there, and it's you can put your awareness on it, or you can kind of just, focus on other things. But I in general, actually, I just try not to think too
Be
much
too
about the
much.
suffering of
Yeah,
the world,
yeah,
you know,
yeah, for sure.
because it,
Like, I
because
mean, as a psychic, you don't want to be feeling everybody's starving, hungry pain in Africa and all of that kind of stuff. Like, you
yes.
can't live a life and function with all of that. But yeah, it's fascinating to me. And have you found that since you unfolded into this more, that animals are more drawn to you? Because since I did my Reiki qualifications, and I'm not big on animals, like, but they come over to me, and if they've got a dribbly dog, I don't want to, like, please no, please don't. So do you find that animals that they're aware that you're in that frequency and in that energy, even if they're not communicating, just to be in your presence?
It's a tough one. I, of course, am always going to wish animals were more drawn to me, but for me, it's very natural. I walk into a room, and even if I'm not like I'm not intending to communicate necessarily with an animal, but I am just naturally going, "Hey, love bug. Hi, sweetheart." So that's just like my natural response to seeing an animal, whether it's a squirrel outside or anything. So I think that naturally a lot of animals respond really well to that, and they do just kind of naturally get a little bit excited to connect to me, but doesn't mean every animal does. Some just don't, or I'm a stranger to them and they're they
I love,
just
yeah,
go F off.
I love cats because they're just like, no, not today, whatever,
Yes.
Jack, be gone. Um, so what advice would you give? Because we've got listeners, they've got animals both here and in spirit. What advice would you give to somebody, apart from buy your book, which we will cover in a minute,
Mm.
to start unlocking their own communication with their animals? What tips would you give them to start?
Yeah, with their own animals, first of all, as with any kind of intuitive art, anything that goes under psychic abilities, it is really helpful to make an effort to do some kind of mindfulness practice. Meditation is wonderful because it does you do get practice in quieting your normal sort of thinking brain so that you can notice those subtle impressions coming through from your animal. Because a lot of the time it is going to be subtle. Unfortunately, it's not going to hit you over the head a lot of the time. So some kind of meditation practice, it doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not a great meditator myself, but just making a little bit of time every day to quiet your own brain in some way. And then I'd say most of the time, most of us are automatically sending our animal the energy of what we're trying to communicate. So it's not often that the issue is that you're not communicating with your animal. Um, Sometimes the issue is that we're sending mixed signals to our animal. We're communicating a little bit confusingly to them. So, for example, especially with behaviors like with living animals, the animal's doing something we don't like, and we say, "Don't do that," you know. And when we're saying that, so like, let's say, "Don't jump on people," or "Stop jumping on people." When we're saying that to our animal, we're sending them essentially the energy of them jumping on people, sending them an image of them jumping on people. And it gets very confusing for the animal. So with behaviors, often we're confusing them. And so they end up thinking, oh, you want me to do this? Okay, so I'll do that. It's always very helpful to be aware of that and make sure that we're always focusing on what we would love for our animals to do instead. So instead of jumping on people, what is the behavior we're actually looking for? You know, greeting people calmly, all feet on the floor, you know, that kind of thing, let's say. So there's that aspect, but what most people struggle or feel like they struggle with is actually sensing what their animal is wanting to communicate with them. And so I'd say that, you know, just carving out a little bit of time each day to sit quietly with your animal without any pressure on yourself or the animal to receive anything from them, but just being open, sitting quietly, maybe asking them a question and just sitting there in the quiet and seeing if you get any kind of impression from them, whether it's seeing an image in your mind's eye or a feeling all of a sudden that comes up, or maybe a word or a sound in your mind. And just noticing what comes through, but also without the pressure of getting anything, just being open. Making a habit of that is really good. The other thing that I also recommend people do is because sometimes that way of connecting to their animal can feel like just too much pressure on themselves, the animal, they're getting in their head, they're overthinking it. They really know their animal so well already. So they're overthinking everything that they
Mhm.
feel like they're sensing from them. Is that just because I knew that, or just because, you know, so there's all kinds of thoughts that can come up. So if that is you, then I would say, or you know, the listener, then I would say that a different way to approach it that might be helpful is to sit down quietly again with your animal, let them know maybe one or two questions that you have for them that you're wondering about, maybe why they do a certain thing or how they're feeling in their body or, you know, whatever it is. Let them know your question. Let them know you would love if they can share their answer with you in the next day or two. And then you just kind of leave it and you go about your day. And then you'll notice that that, you know, when you're doing something totally mindless, that's often when you'll get the response from your animal. So you're doing the dishes and all of a sudden, and maybe in your mind's eye, you see your dog and then you get the sense of pain in your back, you know? And so noticing those out of the blue connections coming through, and or if it's something that kind of repeats itself a couple of times throughout the day. And that might work a little bit better for some people.
I love it. Pretty much the same as if trying to communicate with your guides. Just it's not going to
Absolutely.
be instantaneous because you're too busy looking for it. So let
Yes.
it go.
Yes.
Absolutely. Love it. So tell us about your book. What's it called? What was your inspiration? What's it for?
Yes. So my book, for those who are watching, can see it on the screen here. So
It's
it's
so
called,
pretty.
yes, it is so pretty. And I did not
Yeah,
do the
it is.
cover. I'm so grateful to the illustrator. Um, she did a lot of the work for me in terms of selling it. So the book is called Animal Intuition, Communicating with Pets, Animal Spirits, and the Energies of the Natural World. And it's essentially um, an in-depth guide into animal communication, how it functions, how you can do it yourself, how you can use it for any behavioral challenges going on in your own home, how you can also potentially connect to your own animals that have passed away, as well as some stories of inspiration of various clients of mine who have gotten to experience animal communication. And so it's essentially kind of a how-to and an in-depth guide into it.
I love it. So for all things, so both living and pets in spirit, as well as natural elements. I love it.
Yes, yes, it's a lot.
Yeah, no, well, good, as it should be. So I'm obviously going to put a link to your website and all of your details in the show notes for anybody that wants to book a reading with you, who wants to learn from you, because you also do teaching, don't you? I
Yes,
saw that you've got a weekend where you teach people how to communicate with their animals and stuff like that. Must be so much fun. So tell us
yes.
about that.
Yeah, so I teach both in person where I'm at in Portland, Oregon in the US, and I also teach online. So I have various online courses as well. And I also actually am starting an online animal communication community, essentially, a monthly sort of membership where if whether you're an aspiring animal communicator or just an animal intuitive enthusiast, um, and it's where you can get extra practice with animal communication and kind of get a sense of community, as well as some various lectures on the topic as well. And so I'm very passionate about supporting people who want to learn and develop their abilities and who feel drawn to it. And like I said, like for me, I didn't necessarily have any particular experiences with it when I was little, and I think that can sometimes get in people's way. They doubt if they're supposed to do this work in life, or if they're, if they're talented enough. And honestly, I just think people just need to have some kind of pull towards it, and that's really all you need. And because that's ultimately what's going to push you to learn, because it's a skill that definitely needs to be practiced, and you have to have a little bit of oomph to or desire to put in that work, because it's not always it's
Yeah.
simple but not necessarily easy, as with mediumship and all
Yeah,
the things.
totally get you. Totally get you. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing your wisdom with everybody. I know that there's all because people are always asking me if I do animal communication, and I'm always saying no. Purely because I do think anything you want to do, you do have to put the hours in to
Yes.
practice. And
Mhm.
I'm still not happy with where my evidential is. So I'm not moving until I've done everything I need to do with that. So I will direct them your way, Taya,
Oh,
and
that's
I'm
very
sure that
sweet.
everyone will love checking you out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.